Hello and welcome to my Yu-Gi-Oh channel. Today we're looking at some brand new cards from Burst of Destiny, which are to support the Magicky archetype. Greater Magicky Battle is a level 4 light attribute fiend type tuner effect monster with 1600 attack and 1600 defense. You can only use the second effect of this card's name once per turn. It cannot be used as material for a synchro or exceed summon unless it is for a Magicky monster. 1. If you control a Magicky monster, you can reveal this card in your hand. During your main phase this turn, you can normal summon one Magicky monster in addition to your normal summon or set. You can only gain this effect once per turn. And 2. When this card is normal summoned, you can target one level 4 or lower normal monster or Magicky monster in your graveyard and special summon it in defense position. This is the example I would give of what I would think as the perfect tuner monster. Not only does it have the ability to allow an additional normal summon, which means if you've already got the Magicky monster that you need on the field, you can just outright normal summon this by revealing it. It's not restricted to who it can summon so long as it's part of the Magicky archetype. So it could be this card or it could be another variation of this card, whichever you prefer. And then you can go into your synchro monster. It's really nice and it's very consistent for the archetype. I can't think of too many tuner monsters that actually have these types of effects, outside of things like the resonators where I know they can actually special summon themselves, or one of their other fellow resonators to be able to go into things like Red Nova Dragon. The secondary ability actually works flexibly if you happen to have this card normal summoned onto the field and no other Magicky monsters. You can outright special summon a normal monster or a Magicky monster from your graveyard in defense position, which means that essentially the first and second effects work really well together. If you don't happen to meet one of the conditions, you often meet the other condition, which means you're able to therefore go into your synchro monster very easily. My only concern is it is limited to the Magicky archetype that you can do this, and it's limited to synchro summoning only for Magickeys and exceed summoning for Magickeys. But I think if you were to just let this splash into any type of deck, you'd have so many variations of Magicky hybrid decks, it would just make all of these decks a bit of a joke. Magicky Mutated Ogre Transforming is a level 8 fire attribute thunder type synchro monster with 2800 attack and 2800 defense. The materials: 1 Magicky tuner monster and 1 non-tuner normal monster. You can only use the second and third effects of this card's name each once per turn. 1. This card can make up to 2 attacks on monsters during each battle phase. 2. During your main phase, if you control this card synchro summoned using monsters with 2 or more different attributes as material, you can set 1 Magicky spell or trap card directly from your deck to your spell and trap zone. And 3. If your opponent normal special summons a monster with the same attribute as a monster in your graveyard, you can destroy that monster. I love the design of this card and it's very powerful as an effect monster and for a synchro monster in general. The first ability is okay because you can attack up to 2 monsters every battle phase, which means you can clear your opponent's board very quickly. The secondary ability actually works if and incentivizes you if you use 2 different attributes to summon this. So long as you're doing that, you're instantly able to each turn set one of your Magicky spell or traps. Therefore, you can be able to activate it during your turn or your opponent's turn if it happens to be a trap card. But the third effect is definitely the best of it. Depending on what your opponent normal special summons, and depending on what you have in terms of attributes in your graveyard, you can outright destroy that monster. That means you don't actually have to deal with it. Unless it has a normal summon ability or a special summon ability, you can wipe your opponent's monsters out before they ever actually get to set up against you. Whilst I think this is a decent effect, it does reward you the more attributes you have in your graveyard. So the longer the duel has gone on for, the more likely you are to have different attributes. And remember to have as many as variety as you can. That way you can almost guarantee this will work against any of your opponent's decks. Considering that there are 6 attributes, and I think the Magicky archetype actually have at least 1 of attribute, that means you are definitely having no excuse but to be able to use this effect. I'm sure you will splash in other cards, just random ones which will support this, just so that you've got things that your opponent isn't expecting. Magicky Possessed Spirit Wapathu is a rank 4 water attribute sea serpent effect monster. It succeeds with 2000 attack and 2000 defense. It requires 2 level 4 monsters to summon it. 1. If this card is exceed summoned, you can detach 1 material from it, add 1 level 4 or higher normal monster from your deck or graveyard to your hand. 2. If this card has a normal monster as material, it gains this effect. At the start of the damage step, if this card battles an opponent's monster with the same attribute as a normal monster and or Magicky monster in your graveyard, you can detach one material from this card, make your opponent send their battling monster to the graveyard. I think this is definitely worthwhile for the simple fact it hasn't got very many conditions to it. Unlike the previous synchro monster which needed Magicky as part of the archetype, this doesn't. You can summon it just from having 2 level 4 monsters. This does have the ability to search for high level normal monsters, which if you're running that type of deck, maybe you'd consider splashing this in as an additional extra deck monster, which is fine for the first effect. The secondary effect actually rewards you for having normal monsters as material to this. To be able to detach that monster and to just get rid of one of your opponent's monsters that's battling this card is brilliant, because most cards that are sent to the graveyard don't have effects, whereas certain monsters that have destruction effects do float into other effects or to search into other cards. By doing this, you have that flexibility. It also rewards you from either having Magickeys as part of the archetype as well, so it does work alongside its archetype, but it also works a little bit more specifically towards normal type monsters. Magicky Battle is a quick play spell card with the effect to target one normal monster, a Magicky monster or Magicky Maftia in your graveyard, shuffle it into the deck, then if you activated this card in response to the activation of an opponent's card or effect, non-token normal monsters and Magicky monsters you currently control are unaffected by that opponent's effect. This works alongside to recover one of your monsters, so long as it's a Magicky monster or a normal monster, and it goes back into the deck. Since it's shuffled, that means at some point you might be able to get it back, but actually it rewards you if you trigger this effect in response to what your opponent is activating. It provides your monsters with that level of additional protection from that card for the rest of that turn. This is definitely worthwhile running a couple of copies of, but it does depend on the situation. It is quite conditional. For its first initial effect, it's not necessarily worth running just to do this, because you've got things like Pot of Avarice that can actually do this that much easier. Jar of Avarice is the conditional trap version of that, which is actually a lot better than this card is. And the final card is Magicky Locking Lock. It's a normal trap card with the effect 1. Tribute 1 non-token normal monster or Magicky monster, then target up to 2 normal monsters and or Magicky monsters in your graveyard whose total levels equal 8 or less. Special summon them in defense position, then you can apply one of these effects. Immediately after this effect resolves, synchro summon one Magicky synchro monster, or immediately after this effect resolves, Xyz summon one Magicky Xyz monster. I love the design of this. This basically lets you go into either an instant Xyz monster or an instant synchro monster on your opponent's turn. It's really nice if you've got potential threats your opponent has on the field. You are able to then counter that, or to at least prevent your opponent from being able to game you in that turn if they're trying to go for a big play. Out of all the cards that we've listed with the Magicky archetype so far, this is definitely my favourite, the Greater Magicky Battle. You might be considering and looking at me thinking, Peter, what are you talking about? Surely the Synchro Monster or the Xyz is actually much better. But I would argue that this, as a key tuner monster, remember, not all tuner monsters are created equally. There are some that are just absolutely awful, perhaps at the beginning of the game, that really don't have any play at this moment. Examples include things like Trap Eater and I think Sinister Sprocket. They're very conditional and have to be used in conjunction with certain decks or to meet certain conditions, even to just summon them. This is able to just Monster Reborn one of your cards, or to be able to just add an additional summon to go straight into your Xyz or your Synchro monster. As for the other cards, I don't have any cards that I dislike. I think actually what the Magicky archetype seems to be getting from these plays is really decent, and I definitely support the style they're going for. I love the fact that actually supporting normal type monsters and giving them place potentially within the competitive landscape. I hope and I'm excited to see the direction they go in the future, and potentially, since they've only got, I think they've got a couple of fusion monsters, they've got an Xyz monster now, and now they've got a Synchro monster. Maybe we've still got a couple of monsters still left to be released. I'm hoping for at least another Xyz and maybe one more Synchro, because I know they definitely have at least 2 fusions, so at least if that's the direction they're going, they've got an outright balance between the various extra deck forms. What do you guys think of these cards? Is there anything you like in particular? Do you agree that this tuner is actually amazing in comparison to some of the other tuner monsters? Or do you think some of the cards are a bit lackluster and you would have liked to have seen actually better variations? Whatever you think, leave those comments down below. Like the video if you enjoyed it, and don't forget to subscribe for more daily Yu-Gi-Oh content.